Welcome to Night Callers Archives. Before Night Callers became a vidcast on YouTube and Facebook, it was a live call-in show on Blog Talk Radio. We did things a little differently back then. It was a different time in the Bigfoot world. There were only a few podcasts, and Bigfoot was still taboo to talk about. We didn't have the TV shows, hundreds of Bigfoot groups and conferences, or funny memes that we have now. They were different times, folks. We've had many amazing hosts and knowledgeable guests over the years that helped get the Bigfoot community to where it is now. We hope you enjoy these older shows, as they are a phenomenal source of information and good times. If you hear a guest or host that you would love to see back on the current Night Callers, please drop a comment. Enjoy the show.
Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome, everyone, to Night Callers Radio. My name is Laurie Phillips, and I'm here tonight with Luke Gross and Lauren McGrory. Everyone have a great 4th of July out there. I know I did. How about you, Luke and Lauren? Did you guys have a 4th of July? Luke and Lauren, are you there?
Oh, yeah, I'm here. I'm sorry. It's a great 4th of July. I had a great 4th of July. I got to see my great niece, and we barbecued, and we had a lot of fun. Busy.
Busy. Yes, and as a matter of fact, you probably haven't even had a shower yet. I mean, we caught you as you walked in the door from building a deck, and I know it's been incredibly busy. How about you, Lauren? What did you do for the 4th?
Nothing. It rained all day long, and I mean, there were people outside shooting fireworks off, but the actual town fireworks show that they do over the reservoir, it got canceled till tonight. So after the show, I gotta run over there and watch them. But it rained all day. I couldn't believe it. I was so.
Oh my gosh. Well, I went to Palestine and watched their fireworks show, and for a little town, they had an awesome fireworks show. It was just beautiful. And I got a chance to do a little field research, wander around out in the woods a little bit. I think I saw a track that I was not dressed appropriately to crawl down that creek bank to check it out, but it looks like a track. So anyway, onward with the show. Anybody else have anything they want to add? Any new news or anything like that?
Oh, nothing right now.
Okay. Well, we'd like to make a brief announcement. Regretfully, we are announcing that Brian Wallen's departure from Night Callers Radio. Brian has elected to leave the show to pursue further interests. We at Night Callers continue to respect and love Brian and wish him the best of luck. So I'm going to go ahead and go on to introducing our guest. Our guest tonight is Laurie Battson. Laurie is a nationally known educator on wildlife. He has traveled around the country for the last 30 years studying alleged sightings. Even though he faced the usual ridicule, as we all do, he has remained a believer. Larry first became intrigued when he spoke with Jim Fowler of Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. I remember that show. Loved it. Who related an event of searching for the brown bear in Russia, and all the guides wanted to talk about with Bigfoot. They were very afraid of them. Larry's interest is in all wildlife, and Bigfoot is another form of wildlife. Larry runs Wildlife Educational Services, a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating people. Larry was a natural choice for giving the lecture, Cryptozoology, Bigfoot Myth or Reality, to the U.S. Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Department of Interior, where by simulcast it reached tens of thousands around the country on June 9, 2009 at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife National Conservation Training Center. in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. Now, since then, and Larry will attest to this, his life has been upside down. This event has opened the way to many new and exciting projects all over the country. In the world of Bigfoot, it's an historical event in more ways than one. Larry says that the DVDs and other articles will be available for sale, and all the proceeds are going to a very good cause, wildlife conservation. So we'll find out more about that later on in the show. Right now, Nite callers would like to invite Larry Battson on. Larry, how are you doing tonight?
Well, we're doing pretty good. Here in west central Indiana, we had rain all day yesterday, but today is 75 degrees and there's sunshine, and the world doesn't look too bad.
So were your fireworks fizzled out also for the 4th of July?
Not too much. I live out in the middle of nowhere in rural Indiana, and a little rain doesn't stop these people from shooting and blowing up stuff. So, but they were kind. We have several big cats. I've got about 6 Bengal tigers right now that really don't like fireworks very well, but my neighbors, which are pretty good ways away, they were kind. They didn't have their 4th of July fireworks too long, so that was pretty good. We'll see what happens tonight, though. They probably got some bombs left over, so I'll hope for the best.
Well, I'm gonna begin by asking you. Okay, you started out. They're asking to see if you can speak up, Larry. Is there any way you can speak up? To me, you sound fine. But
absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, my first question, I'm going to just jump right in, began in wildlife, right? Just animals, and similar to Jim Fowler. You know, he had an interest in wildlife. Was this from the time you were a little kid that you were interested in wildlife? I mean, were you out there picking up bugs and snakes and...
Yeah, absolutely. Since a youngster. And basically, when I grew up, I just created my own job. Wildlife Educational Services is a non-for-profit. At least it's recognized that way by the government finally. And I have, for the last 30 years, I traveled about 200 schools a year with a collection of wild animals that have been handled and trained to do lectures. We don't really want them to do anything but be themselves, but we have to take them in and out of situations that are always new to them, so we have to have nice, even-tempered animals. That's why, over the years, well, in the old days, we used to take animals out for the Johnny Carson show with Jim Fowler, and we used to do, this will really age me, Mike Douglas, Merv Griffin. We've done the Today Show with him, and then various other speaking engagements. The thing with Jim is they'll ask him to come to a zoo or to a wildlife park to speak, but they'll always say, bring your animals. Well, he doesn't really have animals, but he knows guys all over the country that have these animals that are trained and handled for specific educational work. So he'll call us up when he's within, I've traveled as far as 500 or 600 miles to meet him at an event and help him with it by taking animals and also helping with the program. And that's what we used to do in the old Johnny Carson days. We used to load up a bunch of animals, put them on an airplane, go out and do Carson for 2 or 3 days, and we hit some other shows too. Regis used to be out in L.A. He had a little morning show we do, and as I said, Mike Douglas and Merv Griffin and things. So it was a lot of fun, you know. It was an opportunity. And
it was something that you love to do anyway.
Well,
so
it is.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I know that I had told her earlier when I was giving a brief introduction about Jim Fowler was the one that really basically intrigued you with the initial subject of Bigfoot. Well, did you even know anything about it before then?
Oh, absolutely. I'd been reading the subject since Roger and Bob made their film there in Bluff Creek. I knew all about that. In fact, I still have the original Argosy magazine, but it was always kind of if something was in the newspaper, I'd read about it. I never was really thought much about it. The only place I thought about it was if it was true was Northern California, Oregon, and Washington. Well, after I went to Georgia with Jim to do that program at Callaway Gardens, that was right after he returned from Russia. And over breakfast one morning, he was talking about doing this documentary, and he got a chuckle because he said all the Russian guides wanted to talk about was Bigfoot because they had seen something. They had found tracks in the same area that they were filming these bears. And so, that kind of went in the back of my head. Well, that's pretty wild. Here are Russian guides, and they're claiming that they're seeing such a thing over there. Well, it wasn't long after that I was approached by a company in Ohio that produces several big outdoor shows. And they're always looking for something new. And I'd been working with them for many years. I'd go in and set up wild animal displays, or I'd do programs. That's where I developed a show where we actually build a desert, and I'd go into the desert and catch tarantulas and Gila monsters and rattlesnakes. And so any idea that I had, they were pretty up for. So I just threw it to him one day. I said, why don't we do something on Bigfoot? And I said, well, that sounds great. He says, let's put a budget behind it and see what you can do. So that was the time that I really dug in and I started doing research, and I actually built an 8-foot model. We had enough money that I called Roger Patterson's widow, and I bought a copy of the film from her for videotape. But what really opened it up for me was when I called Al Hodgson out at Willow Creek at the Hodgson's Variety Store, because the first thing I wanted from him was souvenirs that had anything to do with Bigfoot as far as the display was concerned that we were going to put together in Ohio. Well, he said he had all kind of coffee mugs and lots of stuff, bumper stickers and so forth, so he put a package of that together. Then I asked him, I said, well, do you know of any eyewitnesses, someone to have claimed to have seen a Sasquatch? And he said, yeah, there was a couple of guys in the store a while back. He said, let me look in my wallet and see if I still have their phone numbers. Well, the two guys that had stopped by were John Green and Bob Titmus. So he gave me their phone numbers, and I just called them up. They called John first and told him what we were doing, and he thought that was pretty cool. He says, I'll be of any help that I can. And I said, well, I'm looking for an eyewitness and someone else. He said, well, you need to call my neighbor. My neighbor's Bob Titmus. And here's his number. And he just lives, I think he lived like 2 blocks over. They both lived in Harrison Hot Springs, British Columbia. So I called Bob up the very first night, right after I talked to John. And he was pretty dry to talk to. I mean, he wasn't very forthcoming. Our conversation lasted probably an hour and a half, and I asked him during the conversation whether he had ever seen a Sasquatch. Well, he got real quiet, and he said, yes. He says, I've seen them twice. I saw one off the coast of Alaska in the Wrangell Narrows when I was in the Navy. I saw it from a ship, and I saw 3 Sasquatches in Kitimat, British Columbia, right outside of Kitimat. And I said, well, give me some details. He said, well, when I was in the Navy, he says, one evening I walked out on the deck. All the guys were down under the ship, and they were playing cards. And he said, I decided to go out there and smoke a cigarette and just look at this beautiful Alaskan countryside. And he looked along the beach, or in other words, the shore, and he could see this animal that was walking on 2 legs. It was, it was a pretty good distance away, but he could tell it was pretty big, and he said it was very powerful looking. He said it was chestnut brown in color. He said he watched it for, maybe 15, 20 seconds, and it walked up into the bush, and it was gone. Well, he told me he never really mentioned that to anyone in the ship, but he had decided that once he got out of the Navy that he was going to have a new interest. See, Bob was a taxidermist, and he was a hunter from British Columbia, and in his words, he had killed and he had stuffed just about everything that lives in this mountain.
Good Lord!
But he had not one of those. So as soon as he got out of the Navy, that was his work. That's what he did, and he was quite a tracker as well. Experiences in Kitimat, he did most of his research alone. And he was by himself, and he walked up on this 1,500-foot basic rock wall, kind of like what you'd El Capitan in Yosemite, something very similar to that. And he told me, he said he watched 3 of these creatures, these Sasquatches, freestyle rock climb up this wall where they just feel for a crack and pull their body up. He said there was a big one. He said there was a little bit smaller one and what appeared to be a baby. And in his words, what it would have taken a man in very good physical condition do, they did it in about 30 minutes.
Wow.
And see, Bob was also, he was the one that turned Roger Patterson, Bob Gimlin, onto the Bluff Creek area, because he knew that area 10 times better than those guys did. In fact, the animal that they filmed was the same animal that he was almost 100% certain that he ran into one night. He was back in that area by himself. See, this is all rainforest, and you get back in this wilderness, and when the sun starts to go down, it catches you by surprise because it's so dark and dingy and not that well lit anyway. So he realized that he didn't have a chance to get back to his main camp, and to wander around in these forests is life-threatening. So right away he decided he was going to dig a pit, and he dug this pit to lay in to sleep that night, and he covered himself with debris. Well, about, he guesstimated 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, he could hear something coming through the forest. He said at first it sounded like a couple elk. Really, he said it sounded like a herd of elk. And then he realized that it wasn't, and this, whatever it was definitely walking on 2 legs. Well, it stopped. And when it stopped, he could hear it sniffing the air, and what was happening, it could pick up his scent. But
it didn't know where he was.
Yeah, he did not know where he was. And he said that thing started walking back and forth through the woods, tearing trees down, throwing rocks, screaming, carrying on. And this went on most of the night.
Trying to get him to flush him out. That's what, oh my goodness. How did he react to this? Was he terrified? Or?
Well, he said, absolutely. He said needless to say, he didn't get any sleep that night, but he said about daylight, he pulled himself out of this pit, and he gets to investigating, and he looks around, and he said the area that this thing had been walking back and forth, he said it looked like a bulldozer had gone through that forest. Then he looked on the ground, and he saw the footprints, and then he remembered those footprints so well. He might even have taken a casting. That I don't remember. When he went that night after they'd shot the Patterson film, and he went to Bluff Creek, and he saw those tracks on that sandbar, he realized that was the same Sasquatch that walked back and forth through the woods that night when he was buried in that pit.
Wow.
Yeah.
What? That's incredible.
Well, he was a pretty amazing man. I wish I would have...
Little-known tidbit towards the Patterson film.
Well, there's a lot of little-known tidbits about that film, and it's quite infuriating now. You know, they're analyzing it here, there, and everywhere. It's an animal. I mean, I know Bob Gimlin. I've talked to him on the phone. In fact, I even asked him. I said, Bob, what do you think about the guy that claims he was the fella in the suit? He goes, I don't know why that. He says, years ago, I'd been mad. He said, now, I don't care anymore. So, to see what also Bob had told me is go ahead.
What are your thoughts? I mean, so you think what's in the Patterson film is real, a real animal?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. There's too many. For one thing, the most logical argument is that was a 50-50 deal with Bob Gimlin and Roger Patterson. They were, Roger may have had that camera on his hand, and he actually took the footage, but they were partners on the deal. I mean, both of them were out there together. And Bob never made anything off of that thing. In fact, he got pestered by Rene DeHinden for the copyright, his part of the copyrights for it, till he finally just sold it to Rene for just pennies, practically. And logic would tell you if that would have been a well-planned hoax, that the guy that was coming out in the short end, right away he'd have raised his hand and said, "Hey, we had a guy in a suit. This is all make-believe."
Oh yeah, yeah.
And the second thing is, okay, Roger was a rodeo rider. Bob broke horses for trail rides. And, okay, they build this suit, this pretty darn good suit, and they get this thing done. They look at this suit and they're thinking, this suit looks pretty good, but we really need to put some breast on it.
Yep. Yeah, that was exactly my thoughts too.
and then you look at it, and if you really study that film, and can you remember when you were a kid in Halloween, you had the makeup on and the mask, and you're walking from door to door? Hell, you're walking through someone's yard, you're constantly looking at the ground because you don't want to step on someone's rake or trip over their chihuahua.
Exactly.
You look at this thing, and what people don't realize is there was a flood that had gone through there. I mean, this was rough going, and for that thing to just motivate, and it doesn't never look at the ground.
That's right.
It takes a look at Roger, and you see Bob had the thing in his sights. He had a rifle on that thing, and he said the last thing I want to do was shoot it. He said if the thing would have took a charge toward Roger, he said I would have shot the thing. But and then okay, so Bob, he goes to the site the day after it had been filmed. And it takes him a while to find the tracks because Bob had covered them with bark and leaves and things because they had a heavy rain that night. And so when he finally finds the tracks and he starts tracking this thing, now see, Bob Titmus was an excellent tracker. I mean, as John Green would tell me, he says he could go through that rainforest, he could find the smallest hair on any tree, any leaf. And he says he tracked this thing as it went up the hill, and on this hill there was these pebbles that were about the size of a golf ball, and they were covered with green moss. And Bob told me, he said you could see where this thing had set its heels in, where it set its buttocks down, and from that vantage point, it had a perfect view of the valley below. In other words, while Roger and Bob were making their plaster cast, this thing was watching them.
Sat there and watched the whole time.
And Bob also told me.
Surprise me.
Yeah, Bob had also told me that there was two other animals in that area. They'd found tracks. Like I told people, I said if you've seen one, there's two or three others looking at you that you don't see.
I agree.
Yeah.
I do agree with that.
Because there's no primate, there's no primitive man. We all travel in groups, and this is no exception.
Wow.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I'd heard that. I was reading that you did do and take reports of just single reports where there was a single sighting. Somebody had seen one walk across the road, but you'd kind of changed your strategy and became more interested in people who were having repeat sightings.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Because the one across the road mean nothing to me. Because
yes,
what are you going to do? You're going to go, you cross the road right here, okay? It went that way. Well, hell, sometimes it may be the next day or a week or before they actually have the nerve to talk to you.
Yeah.
By then, the thing's in another darn county. Because one of the first things that anyone ever says when they see one of these things move is how fast they are.
Yeah.
And how they can go from point A to point B very, very quickly. Well, and Bob Titmus told me the same thing. He said when he stopped at that vantage, I said, did you track it any further? And he said, well, there was really no need to. He says, because there was no way I'm going to catch it. And, you ain't going to find it if you're looking for it. That's just
exactly. I have a question for you, Larry. Did you ever do any reports of them in a quadrupedal mode?
Oh, absolutely. I have a good friend that lives in Ohio that they had multiple sightings since '80. They built a home in northern part of Ohio, right on the Pennsylvania line. And one day he said he walked out to burn a brush pile, and he saw the thing take off, and it never went up on two legs. He said it stayed down on all fours. And he said even on all fours, it was huge. And when he saw how fast it moved on four, he realized at that moment that any time he was in the forest, if this thing wanted him, it'd have him.
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, that's it. And I've had encounters just like that, and just along with countless other people too. That it wanted you, it could have you at any point in time. It never turns out that way. It at least it hasn't for me, and I'm glad.
Well,
I'm very glad.
They are definitely, I always get a kick out of it when I do a talk, and after the talk, guys will come up to me, usually younger fellas, and they'll say, well, if I ever saw one, I'd track it down, I'd follow it, and I'd get a picture or something. I said, let me tell you something, buddy. I said, that's real easy to say in this library or wherever we might be doing this program, well-lit library. I says, you're out in the middle of the woods, and it's dark, and you bring down a flashlight, and this thing's looking at you, and it's in your beam, and it turns around and takes off through the woods. And usually in that situation, they're not in a hurry because they're not impressed with you at all anyway.
No.
The last thing on your mind is I'm gonna track that down. That is the last thing on your mind. I'm going to tell you that right now. I mean, I work with wild animals, and I'm not intimidated very easily, but this is a whole different deal.
Yeah, to those, it would be, okay, they're going that direction, and I'm going the other direction. That's usually, from what I hear, just happens. And
something else, too, and I usually, I decided that 99% of all the sightings are never reported. They don't tell anyone.
I agree with you there.
Because most of my reports are ones that have never been in a book. There's usually people will come up to me after a program, or they'll email me, or they'll call me and say, hey, I don't want to talk to you. Usually they're just looking for somebody that understands what they're going through.
Right.
Right.
For many of them, a lot of them, it completely ruins their outdoor experience. It's like the first time you're walking through the woods and you walk up on a rattlesnake, you're thinking, oh, God, these things are everywhere. Well, it's very similar, but just multiply it times 10. And I have decided that someone out there that has worked their entire life for that special retirement home cabin in the middle of nowhere, that one of these people have a film or a picture that is 10 times better than the Patterson film, Gimlin film. It's not going to tell anybody because they know exactly what would happen.
Yeah.
That this hideaway, this vacation home, it would be absolutely ruined. And here's what's funny. I've got a really good friend that lives in Washington, and we've become talking quite a bit. And he has a cabin that's 5 miles south of the Canadian border, and he's had a lot of encounters, which I'm sure we'll talk about tonight. When I told him that, he said, Larry, he said, you're talking to him. He said, I have. And the first email that he ever sent me, and the first time I had the chance to talk to him on the phone, he read an article that was written a couple of years ago out of Kansas City. I was in there doing my rattlesnake program, and a sports writer came up to me, and he said, I want to do a story. I said, cool. I said, that's great promotion for the sports show. He said, I Googled your name. I said, okay. And he said, I want to write a story about Bigfoot. And I said, oh, well, okay, that's fine. Well, he wrote the story, and that story ended up going around the world. And this fellow from Washington read that story, and because I look at this thing a little differently than most people, or a lot of people, I should say, he decided to email. He said in his first conversation, he said, Larry, I'm going to tell you all I can tell you. He says, but here's the deal. I don't want no damn monster quest at my house.
Mm-hmm.
He said, this is just between you and me. And I'll tell you, he sent me some photographs of some footprints that were in the snow that they found in Washington. 23-inch print, 8-foot stride, and there was no drag marks, any slight drag marks from at the toe or at the heel. In other words, this thing was taking a flat, square step down that snow. And it was so cold that this fella, he weighs about 200 pounds. He's basically walking on top of the snow. And these tracks are about 8 inches deep. In fact, when he sent me the photographs of the tracks, it was just chilling. I said, whoa. And he said, we followed those tracks for quite a while, and then they met up with a set of tracks that were 16 inches long with about a 4-foot stride. And then we gave up.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Larry, the people in the chat are just having a cow. They're wanting to know about the lecture. Let me start out by asking you this. How were you approached to do the lecture?
We have the National Conservation Training Centers in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, and we've been going there for 10 years. This is where they train all the U.S. Fish and Wildlife officers. There's also, they give courses for various conservation officers in all 50 states. Secret Service, they take courses there. This is the same facility where Clinton had his big meeting with all the Mideastern leaders years ago. And they, once a year, now this is a high-security government facility. It's an incredible place. I mean, it's just unbelievable. It's in the hills of West Virginia. It's just beautiful. And, I mean, you walk in there and your mouth just goes, this place is, I mean, and the artifacts they have, all the things that are confiscated as far as stuffed tigers from prints in India that they took off, all that stuff is there. In fact, I know the gal in charge of the archives. I've seen unbelievable stuff, you know, stuff you can't even touch, you know, Lincoln's clothing, Civil War stuff, and just incredible.
Wow.
So they have an open house once a year, and they invite the whole community, and they have a variety of activities, and one of the things that they've done is had me come over with my wife and animals, and we do a program in the auditorium, the Beard Auditorium, which is really, really pretty amazing place in itself. So about 3 or 4 years ago, the fellow that's in charge of the whole deal, he came up to me and said, "Hey, Larry," and we become really good friends. He says, I Googled your name. He said, "What's all this Bigfoot stuff?" So I said, I said, well, I've been into it. I said, I've researched, I've talked to eyewitnesses, I've accumulated quite a bit of stuff. So we sat down, chatted for a while, and he said, well, wouldn't it be cool to do a program here? I said, yeah, it would be cool, but this is the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. I said, well, what would they think about it? He said, well, he said, let's work on it. Let's see what happens. So we talked about it for 2 or 3 years. Every time I'd go over in October, he'd bring it up again. So finally, last October, they had a new leader of the National Conservation Training Center, new director take over. And he said, man, he's the greatest. He said, let's sit down and talk to him, and let's do this. So I said, cool. So we sat down, and he said, well, we want you to present the lecture. I had no parameters as far as they didn't tell me what I could and could not say, and went for it. And what an amazing place, because they have their own audio video department, and I had access to huge screens and things, and you talk about helpful. I mean, they were totally behind it, and it was really quite tremendous. They even developed.
Did that surprise you that there was that much support from a government agency about this?
It did, because the day before I was in Washington, before the program I was in Washington, they had their I think they called it the National Fishing Day, and the reflecting pond by the World War II Memorial, they stock with bluegills and bass, and then they bring inner city kids in, and they go teach them how to go fishing, get them interested in the outdoors. And what I've done there for 5 or 6 years for that event is I've taken snakes and gators and lizards and done little programs for the groups there. I get on a golf cart with a couple of park rangers, and we go from each group, and I do 15, 20-minute program. Well, this year was a really big deal, and they had the Secretary of the Interior was there, and all the hot shots with the Obama administration, and they all knew the program was going to be that next night. And they said, man, we can't come. He says, but we know it's going to be recorded, so we want DVDs. We want to see it. And since then, I've got email from Jeff Meldrum, and he said there's a bunch of park rangers in Wyoming that want to see the DVD. And I said, oh, okay, I'll send it your way. And it's been, in fact, I've gotten emails as far away as New Zealand about it. And it's been, what's really cool is it's mainly scientists and biologists and zoologists that have gotten a hold of me about this. And even John Green.
Wonderful.
Oh, it is. And John Green, he called me. He said, Larry, he says, you've got something done that's never been done before. Congratulations. This is phenomenal. And I said, I just knew people, and we've become friends, and they said, let's go for it. But
you didn't realize how huge it was going to be, did you?
No.
But your wife did. Your wife did.
When I left, she said, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to hear how that went, because I thought that was fascinating. Your wife kind of had an insight on how big a thing it really was, and
we sat down and talked, you know, and majority of the audience, I mean, it was open to the community. There was a few Bigfoot researchers there, a handful. But it was mostly, we had over 200 people, and it was mainly people that were taking classes there at the training center. And they're letting off bombs, my neighbors. But mainly I was speaking to U.S. Fish and Wildlife people from states all across the country, all over North America, as far away as Alaska and stuff. But you know what point was brought up to me? Well, she said, before we left, I want to stray here. We sat down, and I was kind of, you know, going, oh, God, I got to do this lecture for this. They're going to think I'm freaking nuts, you know, and steal all my credibility and all this. And she said, you know, no, he says, you shouldn't look at it that way. He says, if they ask you to do this is going to be a big deal.
Yes, it is.
And he says, you will be amazed at what this brings you afterwards. I says, I'm thinking, okay. So after the lecture was over, we sat down in the main room, and with 4 or 5 guys. There's guys that drove 6 and 7 hours to it. In fact, the Fish and Wildlife are thrilled with the response. They got over 100 emails thanking them for having the lecture. I'd ask them, I said, what's the farthest anyone's ever driven to one of these programs they've had in the past? And they'd say, 15, 20 minutes. We had guys drive 6 and 7 hours.
Wow.
And and we sat in the main room, you know, and I was just mentally and physically exhausted, because I drive over, and I did the thing the day before, and then we did the TV interview that was an hour long that went all over North America, I was told. And then I did the lecture, and I'd had so much anxiety about this thing. I was done. I was exhausted. And we sat down, we were just chatting, you know. And the one fella said, he says, you know, he said, this is a monumental moment in Bigfoot history. And I kind of like, what?
Amen.
Mm-hmm. He says, it is. He says, look at this place. He says, for you to do this program, he says, I never in my wildest imagination thought that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service would do anything like this. I said, well.
Exactly.
I said, I guess you're right. So the next thing I know, he posted, he says, I'm going back to home tomorrow, and he lives in Virginia. And he says, I want to put a post out. I'm going to send it to everybody so this thing doesn't just get swept underneath the carpet. He said, this is going to be a tsunami. Mm-hmm. And he was absolutely right. I had no clue at all. It kind of blew me away, because I didn't even know they were going to do the TV interview till I got over there, and that was going to go everywhere. And then when I saw the posters, and see, they were the ones that came up with, the historian had gone back through the archives of the Department of the Interior, and he came up with that press release that had been issued in 1977 on December 21st of what the government would do if a Bigfoot or Sasquatch was proven to exist. And the press release was 3 pages. And what was really cool is they printed out a bunch of them, and everyone that went to the lecture got that press release.
Oh, cool.
And I'll tell you what.
I don't suppose there's any way you can enlighten us on what they would do if one. Or do we have to buy the package to find out?
No. It says, I'll tell you, I got it right here. I even got my glasses on here. It says, undisputed proof of a Bigfoot might cause an immediate short-term problem no law could handle. Word of its discovery would be flashed around the world within hours. Hysteria, fear, or panic might accompany the news in the area where the creature was located. And they're saying, news would be flashed around the world in hours. Well, this isn't now it would be seconds. Mm-hmm. The throngs of curiosity seekers, would-be captors, and others wishing to find Bigfoot would not only create a serious threat to the animal itself, but to public safety as well. Some officials doubt whether any state or federal action short of calling out the National Guard could keep order in the area within the first few hours or days of the creature's discovery. This could be essential until a team of scientists could do the necessary things to ensure the creature's survival. And it goes on to say that it would have an emergency act and would automatically be classified as an endangered species.
Wow.
And the press release is 3 pages.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, that is awesome that they were that prepared back in 1977. To me, looking at it from the outside, as even though I'm a field researcher along with Luke here, looking at it from the outside, we never had an idea of how the government perceived Bigfoot Sasquatch, and whether they even really took it seriously or had any kind of plan or even initial action in the event that one actually was found. And so it was like we didn't know what would happen. We presumed that they would come in naturally and probably cordon off the area and not allow anyone in and for the protection of the Sasquatch. But, that kind of makes it official. And it makes me feel more at ease about, because we try our best to not disrupt the Sasquatch in their own environment and everything else. And our biggest fear is, say, you have a situation where you have a person who has regular activity and somehow or another it gets out, and the next thing you know, you've got all these people running across their property and disrupting this whole situation. It's almost as if they're helpless. There's nothing they can do about the situation. They can't call their local police, and they can't call Parks and Wildlife, and they don't know who to call about, remedying the situation of trespassers and would-be hunters and everything else. But, it's kind of reassuring, just rambling about this, but it is reassuring to know that the people that can do something about it have an awareness of the Sasquatch, and that just makes me feel better.
Absolutely. I mean, the government, well, no matter what many people think, they are on our side.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
well, and I've always been one of these people, and I've probably been one of the worst, that years ago believed there was a conspiracy to cover the whole thing up. I was one of these people. It's all a conspiracy. All the park rangers know about them, and they just covering everything up because they don't want it known, and ignorance is the safest thing for them. If nobody knows about them, then that's the best thing. If they're considered just crypto animals and not anything that's been proven to exist or not real, then they're actually safer.
Well, here's a question. Now, this is leading somewhere else, but could it be possible? Now, I know in the state of Texas that I've been out. I love wildlife, and I've studied wildlife basically since I was a kid. A lot like you, Larry. Just come up. They used to call me the bug man when I was a kid. I would stop and look at every little insect crawling around or whatever. But now I've seen red wolves, wild, and they weren't a crossbreed in the state of Texas. And I've talked to the Texas Department of Wildlife and asked them about the red wolf. And they've told me, and they've told my wife also, that no, these wolves do not exist. Wolves do not exist in the state of Texas. And come to find out why, it wasn't that they didn't exist. It's just they consider there's not a viable breeding population in the state of Texas. Therefore, they cannot exist. And also in Oklahoma, the same. That is how they look at it. Now, I'm wondering if they could possibly look at that as far as Bigfoot is concerned.
Well, it's a possibility. I think a lot of it is park ranger, wildlife specialist doesn't ever want to go on putting himself on the line saying that he has seen such a thing or found evidence of such a thing.
He doesn't want to go on the record as saying so.
No, I know, because it's called job security. And,
right.
And that's happened. I know that for a fact, many occasions. In fact, one of the programs that we're discussing this lecture, we're talking about, I think it was Kathy Strain had said that she knew that working with Fish and Wildlife, that if the word Bigfoot or Sasquatch was mentioned in a hallway, you could lose your job.
Wow.
So But here's what was really wild. When they introduced me, the first thing they said was that, a lot of people are wondering why the National Conservation Training Center and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is hosting and sponsoring a lecture about Bigfoot. And everybody started laughing. He said, but let me tell you something. He said, the foremost zoologist in the world, George Schaller, and he proceeded to tell his credentials. He studied the snow leopard, Sumatran tiger, the foremost world-renowned zoologist. In his office, he has a plaster foot casting of a Sasquatch. And when he was in his office, this gentleman said, he asked George, he says, I see you have a Bigfoot cast there. He said, do you believe that they exist? He says, well, he said, there's no evidence out there that says they don't. Mm-hmm. And in fact, as John had told me, when they showed the tracks to George Schaller that they had, he said right away, he said, well, obviously we have an animal here.
And so we are watching to see the phone lines light up. We're trying to get all the questions in the chat. Let me see. Let me go back up here to the top. Larry, are you still with us?
Yeah.
Let me see. We had a ton of questions. Okay. Sharon wanted to know, and I apologize, everyone, for not getting to these questions. Sharon wants to know if Bob Gimlin knew there were others in the area.
Right.
Did he know that there were other Bigfoot in the area, or did this...
Yeah, they'd have found evidence of 3 altogether.
Oh, okay.
There could have been more than that, but they definitely found evidence of 3.
Obub says, the watershed event. Please ask him to discuss his recent lecture with the Department of Interior.
Okay. And
do you know what the watershed event is about?
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay.
They have so many events over there that I'm not. They have a lot.
Okay. Okay. Sharon Lee says, I'd like to know where Larry's friend lives in Ohio. I'd like to know if I'm in the vicinity.
Around Conneaut.
Around Pontiac.
Conneaut.
Okay.
With a C. Conneaut. Conneautt, I think.
Okay. Okay, let me see if I can go on down here. Question, hey Larry, are you and this is from Bill Green. He says, hey Larry, are you currently investigating any new sightings, footprints, and is this new Bigfoot lecture on DVD yet?
No, I don't have. They were supposed to send them to me, so I'm thinking because of the July 4th holiday, it's got tossed back a little bit. So I should have them next week. There hasn't been anything that I know of in my neck of the woods. Right now, I'm kind of hot and heavy in working on Washington State with a gentleman out there, so he's keeping me up abreast and see what happens.
Okay. We have another question from Reverend Strong. He says, since the presentation, Larry, have you had any folks come forward with stories who, because of their positions, might otherwise never have said anything?
There's not a lecture that I don't do that someone doesn't come to me with a report. In fact, I was doing a lecture in Danville, Indiana, and I had a fellow that was with the director of waterworks for the town of Greencastle, Indiana, and he waited till everybody left, and he walked up and he says, I want to tell you, he says, I was in Washington fly fishing, and he said, we were standing out in the middle of this stream, and we're getting our lines wet, and all of a sudden we saw a rock. It looked like it weighed 200 or 300 pounds, like it was catapulted out of the forest and landed in the middle of the stream. He said, we just reeled our lines in, and we didn't really say nothing to each other, and we left. He said, I saw that. He said, I didn't actually have to see it. He said, every hair on the back of my neck stood up when I saw that.
Oh, gosh.
And then when I was in Shepherdstown, a gentleman who's developing this new camera, along with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, he had a sighting in '95, and with him were 2 FBI agents, and they saw it too.
I do have a couple of more questions. Apparently, I misunderstood about the watershed. What they're saying basically was this presentation was a watershed event. It was that momentous.
Oh.
They're wanting to hear more about the presentation, but let me go ahead and ask this question from NDRT. Has Larry ever had an aggressive encounter? And why do you think that aggressive encounters happen?
Why do they happen? Well,
yes.
If we were going to look at any type of behavior on primates, this will be like a big silverback gorilla charging you when you get too close to his troop, or same with chimps or baboons or anything like that.
Right.
It's usually that's what it's all about. And I've always said if you see one, there's 3 or 4 that you don't see. That they see you, but you don't see them.
Mhm. Well, okay. I think that is about all the questions. Did someone give that phone number out there again? So if anyone wants to call in and talk to Larry personally, they can call the number. Bit of a problem. We're having a thunderstorm here, and I'm having to stand away from my computer by a window. I live out in the middle of nowhere. Right now, the number is 646-716-4530. Did you have something to talk to him about, Luke? I think I interrupted you, and I apologize for that.
Oh, well, that's okay. I was just going to ask him, do you think that your presentation had a profound effect on government officials?
Well, what a couple people brought up to me, and I didn't really think about till after the fact, but they said especially with the television interview that went out to everywhere. I mean, every national park, anything affiliated with the Department of Interior gets this feed out of Shepherdstown. And they said, we don't know what young biologist or zoologist or whomever with the Fish and Wildlife Service that may be working in Washington, Oregon, or Northern California that may have been inspired now to do their own research, and they may be the one that puts all the pieces together into this puzzle. Mm-hmm. So, we don't know. That'd be pretty cool.
Yes, because they get paid to be right out there. Right in amongst them. That's awesome.
Absolutely. They can collect their own evidence and whatever, and they may be the one who we don't know.
Yeah, that's absolutely. Well, I definitely feel that a door has been opened in a major way because you've done something that's never been done before, and
yes,
with a lot of positive feedback. As far as I know, did you get any negative feedback? From anybody?
No, not really. I mean, the only negative I got, a couple of the forums, people said it was just another lecture, but they weren't there.
Right. It just had to be there.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's why it was great. It was recorded on DVD, and so, but yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so now, if anyone wants these DVDs, how can they contact to purchase these?
Well, I don't know if we've had quite a reaction for them, but they can go to my website, LarryTheAnimalGuy.com.
Okay, Lauren, if you will put that URL up.
And then they can go to store, and then it's on there, and then they can see all the details. And recently,
and all the proceeds are going to wildlife conservation, right?
Well, we are a 501c3, and it does go to our wildlife education and also our wild animal rescue work. So
that's fantastic.
That is fantastic.
We're a constant money pit. I mean, it's like
yeah.
We never have enough. We never have enough funding, so this was just another way to help that out.
Oh, that is a great cause, and you get the presentation. It wasn't?
No. In fact, one of the guys sitting there after the thing was all said and done, and we were talking, and he said right away when it was mentioned that it was going to be on DVD and stuff, he said, "Well, you got to put a package together." And I says, really? I said, I hadn't even thought of that. He says, yeah. He says, you're always needing to raise money. I said, well, that's true. And so I said, okay. So they all agreed, and they ordered one right there that night. So I said,
well, everybody, just go to this website. And what's the name of the website again?
It's LarryTheAnimalGuy.com. We made it simple because when I go to do the school programs, I want to give the kids a website that they could remember when they walk back to class. And the kids send us questions about animals, so that's the reason I simplified it a little bit.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I think at times simple is better.
Absolutely.
Less
is best.
Less is best. Yes, I agree. And I think it's a great idea. Everybody go to his website and check it out.
And it's got a great website. Larry, let me ask you something. Okay, when you did the presentation, a brief synopsis of the presentation, what did you cover? How did you gather your information, and what did you choose to present? Were you actually pleading a case for Bigfoot, Sasquatch, or
no?
No? Okay. Well, let's hear what you had to say then.
Well, I basically told them that my history with it and how I was given a project. I was told to research that project, and after researching the project, and at first before the project even began, it was going to be a fun deal, and I was not necessarily 100% sure. I was convinced that these things actually did exist. But after I did my research, basically after I had my phone call with Bob Titmus, that changed everything. It all changed after that. Then John Green, we flew him into Ohio, and he spoke at it for 3 days. And after sitting down talking to him, and he gave me cassette tapes of his interviews with Roger Patterson, the sounds out of Washington have become so well known. He gave me the original cassette tapes from that, several interviews of his, and it was just, and he signed a copy of his book, and it was, it pretty much changed it all. And I just tell the history of this thing, of how I decided that we definitely had something going on here. And then from there, the night I was called in my room, when I was in Ohio doing this exhibit and these lectures, of a fellow that lived in Conneaut, Ohio, and he basically told me over the phone, the first thing, the phone call, he says, I want to talk about Bigfoot. And I said, I've been talking about Bigfoot all day. I said, the show opens at 10 o'clock. And he said, oh, no, he says, I've been at war with these things. I said, what? So we proceeded, that intrigued me. So we had our conversation, and in the lecture I tell what had happened to this gentleman. And what was wild is when after I had that conversation with him, I said, I got to come and meet you in person. So about 2 weeks after that, I was heading to Syracuse, New York, and I was going Highway 90, and Conneaut's right off 90. So I took that exit and stopped at his house, and gosh, what a nice guy. And he had this huge journal, and he had written down everything and anything that had happened to his family in regards to these Sasquatches. Well, I'm looking at this journal, I said, wow, I'd like to have a chance to really read this, but, I'm heading on to Syracuse. He said, I'll tell you what. He said, you give my wife about a month, she'll type out every page, and she'll send it to you. Wow. And we'll make copies, full copies of all the footprint pictures and stuff. Sure enough, in about 4 weeks, there it showed up in the mail. And it's like, it's a lot of pages. I've never counted, but it's a lot of pages. And that one journal that he had, it's a book in itself. In fact, years ago I did these audio tapes, so I call them the Sasquatch audio journals, and I basically went through his journal with all the things that had happened to him. I think one of the most intriguing things that he had a gentleman contact him that was from Saskatchewan. And he told him, he says, I hunt the Bigfoot. He says, I will come to see you. He says, I hunt them. I study them. Oh. This guy shows up, and he's full camouflage, big old fella, got a got a knife on his hip, and he's quite a character. And first night, he asked him, he says, where's all the activity? And my friend says, you just head straight out my back door, straight through those woods, climb over that fence. He says, and they'll be there. So that's exactly what he did in the first fence he climbed over. He took about 3 steps, and he walked into one of these things. He screamed right in his face. He literally crawled back to the house. He couldn't hold a cup of coffee for an hour. And the next morning, he was on a plane back to Canada, and he told the guy before he left, he says, you got big problems. He says, you've got Sasquatches here. He says, you've got big problems. And he left.
Donna C. says, I think I remember reading about Bill Durant doing a presentation about the IGOPCA camera, the Game Commission. Larry, do you know anything about that?
Oh yeah, he was at the lecture that night. He put the initial post on various forums about the lecture, and he is working right now for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service about his camera, because pretty much all the cameras that are out there now are not able to do the job. I mean, the government, let's put it this way, the government has done a lot of research on game cameras, far more than we even know about them, and they've discovered things about these cameras that are being used now that they're just not. You need something better to fool Mother Nature. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Oh, I have a question for you. How did the people react when you were giving the presentation? Did you have anybody snickering out in the audience, or that was looking at you incredulously, or anything like that, or did it appear that they were all in just rapt attention?
Well, it was a good audience. I mean, yeah, I always, whenever I do a presentation, I say at the end, I says, how many of you out there think this is just a load of crap? And I will have to say, out of the 200 some odd people there was only about 3 or 4 hands that went up, and one of them was someone I knew, and they were laughing when they did it. So, but it was pretty well received. I would say that for sure.
Well, that's great. That is fantastic. And I know everybody here at Night Callers wants to thank you for doing that. I know it's something that's very important and something that needed to be done. And you were the man that did it. And I know everybody out there that is in Bigfoot research or interested in the subject is probably wants to thank you too. So there you have it.
Yeah, most of you do. Believe me, there's a few that don't. But I appreciate that very much. And like I said, when I went out there to do it, I didn't have a clue what it was going to amount to this. So I just did the best job I could. And it's a subject that's very dear to my heart. And I talk about it with a lot of passion. And I feel that I was speaking for the hundreds of witnesses that I've talked to over the years and the hours I've spent in the woods and so forth. So yeah, that's what it was all about.
Well, absolutely. I know that there are a lot of people out there that don't talk about what they've seen. You know, you have multiple witnesses just in the area I live. I've gathered up 23 eyewitness reports. And this was within a 50 square mile area of where I'm at right now. And, you know, they don't talk about it, but, you know, these animals do exist. Bigfoot does exist, but until they see, you know, okay, the government's saying, okay, these animals do exist, then they're going to keep their mouth shut. And they probably would even after that.
We have a caller. Can I go ahead and interrupt, because this caller called earlier, and I apologize. I got completely knocked offline. We've got Hurricane Katrina over here right now.
Oh no!
It's really bad. I'm not kidding. I'm thinking I need to go crawl under the house. But right now we do have a caller. I think it is Henry Mays and Bill Green. Hi, Henry.
Actually, it's just me solo.
Oh, it's just you solo? Well, welcome, Henry.
Bill decided he didn't want to, ask us questions, I guess, his standard questions. So it's just me.
Okay.
Well, anyway, I want to say hello, Larry.
Hi.
And I wanted to ask Larry, how does your experience with wildlife and wildlife conservation fit in with your Sasquatch research?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with animal behaviors. I think one instance that comes to my mind when I relate that is in Indiana, a gentleman saw.
Oh, John, go to your room.
Saw one, and we're still on.
Yeah.
Okay. And
My goodness.
What had happened is, as it ran away, the louder, more aggressive the screams became. And I said, well, that's just typical chimpanzee, gorilla, or baboon behavior. You know, when they see a group of lions, they make a couple barks, and then the farther away they get from the lions, the braver and more aggressive they become, like a bully in the schoolyard, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, you know, and then I watch you hear these different programs where they talk about these tribes that live in New Guinea and so forth, and the anthropologists know that they're in there, but like he said, if they don't want to be found, you don't find them. And that's something they do.
Tabitha, quiet. Go to your room, Tabitha. Sorry, I'm having to deal with the kids here.
I was wondering
They're
who
fighting.
had the kids. Yeah, it sounds that way.
Okay, and my second question is regarding the DVD set. I wanted to ask, I noticed that there's 2 DVDs that come with that as well as the poster. Now, is one DVD the presentation, and then the other is the interview that you did?
Right. Yeah, the interview is about an hour, and then the presentation might be on 2. I haven't gotten them yet because it was like an hour and 20 minutes. We didn't do questions long. Because I'm not big on questions. I think a lot of speakers use that just to fill time. So.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, you get the same questions over and over.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what the DVDs cover.
I want DVD set. I guess I might have to go to Plasma to get them, but it's for a good cause, both directions, you know, but I think that's wonderful. Well, and not only that, but it is a historical event. It really is.
Well, that's what all the guys said there that night. I mean, that's the only reason to put this thing together.
Yes.
They said it, not me. Those words never never came out of my mouth, so.
Okay, when did the barrage of phone calls and emails begin? The day after.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, my goodness.
It's still.
And so, what have you been invited to do? Can you kind of let us know what happened since then?
Oh, I've been invited to a couple events I'm not supposed to say because they're in Oregon that I can't talk about, but they sound pretty fa-di-da-di-da, so I doubt if I'll be able to make it because we've got too many responsibilities here. We're raising a baby baboon right now and also a baby bobcat, so that probably won't happen, but yeah, and a couple of conferences. Problem with it is, though, I know God bless the people at the conferences, that I can't go out my door now unless I make money, because everything involves taking care of this wild animal family, so we'll see what happens.
Okay, what are you most excited about since you've done this presentation and the things that are coming about because of it? What are you most excited about that you can talk about?
Well, I don't. Right now, I think it's down the road. I think it's what Fish and Wildlife person maybe makes the discovery or gets it all put together, or you know, right now it's just a bunch of I'm the guy that gave the talk, and good or bad, you know, it's.
You know, it makes you famous. It puts your name on the map, basically. I mean, you were already well known to a certain extent, but now you're well known in a much larger circle.
That's what I've been told. So I don't know what it is. I'll let you know in a year whether that's a good or bad thing.
We'll have you back in a year, and well, a year after the presentation, we'll see where you're at then.
Well, to tell you the truth, they've gotten such great response from it that they're kind of hinting about for me to do it again.
I told you to stop that.
So we'll see what happens.
Henry, I had to put you on mute. You're
we
anyway.
do need to go to our next. We got a next segment. Footers in the Field's coming up, I believe.
It is. It sure is. We are going to take another break here. We have a Footers in the Field segment to play, and then we'll be back with Larry again. Lauren has a great story to tell today, a very interesting one, as a matter of fact. So everyone tune in, listen to this Footers in the Field, and we'll be back with Larry Battson in a few moments.
And now for some news you can use. Hi, I'm Lauren McRory, and I found this week's edition of Footers in the Field at about.com/yourtruetales. Tonight's story is called Sasquatch in a Crate by Ray V. I have never been one for having an interest in the unknown or the paranormal, but when someone you trust tells of an experience from their past, sometimes you have to give the benefit of the doubt. I was reading Your True Tales about a month ago and came across a story that took place in New Jersey, on or about the area of Doris Duke Farms. After reading it, my jaw dropped, because this story gave the one that I was told some validity. My grandfather told me the story back in 1991, a few years before he passed away, and so it goes. My grandfather worked from the late 50s to the early 70s as a landscaper on the Duke Estate in Somerset, New Jersey. When he told this story to my sister and me, he was foggy when giving the exact dates, but he was still very sharp and explained it with incredible detail. My grandfather's job was to manicure and care for the lawns in the north section of the property, whatever that meant, and other various duties. He said that in the summer of '72, one August afternoon, he was told by the head groundskeeper that he would be working overtime and he was needed because of the shipment that was being delivered from Wisconsin. They needed about 8 men to unload a crate and bring it into the garden area. That night the truck arrived, and it was getting late. The men who were asked to stay for overtime were eager to get things done and over with and be on their way. When the truck pulled up, my grandfather said the crate was about 8 feet tall and 5 feet wide. When he asked what was inside of it, the one in charge said they were exotic trees. What happened next was enough to make half of the team get up and walk off the job and not care about the consequences. When the men started pushing the crate off the flatbed truck, a blood-curdling scream was unleashed from within the box. All the men let go of their grip and the crate fell to the floor. As everyone jumped back, realizing that this was anything but a tree, the head keep did all he could to save the contents' real identity and said there was nothing but a black bear inside of it. While the men were regaining their composure, most of the helpers walked off the job. They said they did not want to get hurt or mauled by dealing with a wild animal without the proper safety equipment, so off they went, including my grandfather. Only 2 men stayed to finish what they were asked, and so this is what was told to my grandfather. The 2 remaining men managed to get the load onto a dolly, and then drag it into the garden compound. While guiding the crate down the main path, balance was lost and the crate came off its wheels. A hard hit was enough to crack the side of the crate and loosen the side panel, which fell off and exposed the contents. When the 2 remaining men witnessed that night was enough to make them seek employment elsewhere. What I am telling you was how it was told to me. Inside the crate sat a creature that had the shape of a man but was anything but a man. They couldn't give a height measurement since the creature was in the sitting position, but they said it was huge. It had the shape of a man with a very large frame, only it was covered with black hair. The creature was strapped down and had shackles on his legs, feet, and arms. The face didn't look like a man, but yet had some human features. The workers said it looked more like a monkey or a gorilla. The hair was extremely long and dirty. At one point, one of the men thought the thing was trying to speak or communicate with words, but all it did was keep on drooling. They were under the impression that this creature was heavily sedated because it couldn't keep its head up straight, and it kept resting its head on its chest. A couple of inches away from the creature's head was an empty water bottle nailed to the wall. On the other side of the creature was an IV stand connected to the wall and stuck into its arm. It might have been useful to feed this creature during its transport. One of the oddest parts to this story was that my grandfather was told that this creature was sitting on a rocking chair. I could never understand this. After thinking about it, though, I think it was maybe to prevent this thing from getting cramps during the move. They also said that the odor was overpowering and enough to make anyone pass out. The combined smells of urine, waste, and body odor was rank. My grandfather stuck by this story until the very end. About 2 weeks before he passed away, my sister reminded me to bring it up again and confront him, which I did. There was no need to go over the story again because we both knew how it went. I just asked him, "Papa, remember the crate you had to move in Jersey?" He just looked at me, smiled, and said, "Of course." I said, "Did you embellish it all?" He said, "No, there was no reason to. It happened just the way it said it happened." I said, "Because now would be the time to tell me." He looked at me and said, "You want to know if I embellished the story? The truth is I'm guilty of the opposite. There was so much that I left out. The story was just the beginning. Remember something, I worked there for 2 more years after that. There are things that a young mind should not hear." I said, "But I'm not a child anymore, and I'm sure I can handle whatever it is you have to say." Grandfather said, "Tomorrow I will finish the story. Come back tomorrow." But there was no tomorrow. Grandfather passed away at 2 a.m. at New York Hospital. This is a true story. Remember once again that these articles and reports have not been investigated by the Night Callers team, and their validity can be in question. So to remind all of you listening out there, if you have anything Bigfoot newsworthy happen to you during the week or weekend, you can now send it in to Night Callers, and we will share your big news on the air with all of our listeners. Anything at all, folks. Something you saw in the news, maybe an article like this, something that happened to you recently in the field. We want to hear about it and share it on the air. We will not disclose the name of the area if you do not wish us to. To get your report on the air, please email us at nightcallers@live.com. And for more info, check out www.webjam.com/nightcallers. That's NITECALLERS. We will be taking your emails and messages before 5 p.m. on Sunday evening, and we will get it on the air that night. We hope to hear from y'all. This concludes your weekly dose of Footers in the Field. Have a great night.
Well, great. That was good. It was a very interesting story.
Well, thank you.
Very, very interesting story. Well, are you still here, Laurie?
Yeah.
Mom got knocked off. She'll be back in a second. A storm's hammering her pretty hard.
Okay, well, that's fine. Well, yeah, that was an interesting story. Larry, you had, you did the presentation. We'll pick up right where we left off. I have a few more questions, and you did the presentation. So now that this has taken place, do you feel that that there will be some changes take place? I mean, have you picked up any vibes from anybody that, yeah, maybe something will take place now? Maybe the government will pick up and finally start working on trying to discover or bring to light?
I think the main thing is that all these people that work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service are already in the field, so if they come across unusual circumstances now, maybe if they saw the telecast or whatever, that they might go toward that type of thinking. I do know that there's, I think come out of Montana, they were worried about some unknown predator killing bighorn that they'd introduced in there, and they couldn't figure that out. So, so it's hard to say. It's really hard to say.
Yeah, so I guess you could say it's possible that maybe a few doors have been opened, and maybe whoever does work for the Wildlife Department or Fish and Game would feel more at ease talking about it.
Absolutely, yes, especially after the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, hosted this type of event. And like I said, there's rangers in Wyoming that are really hot to see the DVD, so as soon as we get them in, I'm going to send Jeff Meldrum one and give them opportunity to look at it. Yeah,
that's if you stop and think about it, it's a fantastic deal that's taken place, because doors have been opened, and I've always been one for trying to tell people what I've seen, what I've heard, and what I've found. And you run up against a brick wall a lot of times. Half the time, you get laughed out of the room and say, "Well, you're crazy. I don't think these things exist." But now
that happened to Daniel Boone. In his journals, he supposedly shot and killed and buried one in Kentucky. And he told it around a campfire one night, and they all laughed, and he shut up about it until he wrote his journal. So
I can understand. So here, I don't think we've ever asked you. Have you seen one? Have you seen a Bigfoot?
I'm not 100% sure.
Mm-hmm.
I'm too with the technology now. This day, I get people that send me photos of what they said they thought was one, and you look at the photos and you say, it could be, or we've got HD cameras now and all this stuff that I want something crystal clear and without any doubt.
Yeah.
That even something Photoshop couldn't create. So I want the hard evidence. The hard evidence,
absolutely. I don't blame you. I know there's been times it's what I found, and I don't know if you found. I'm going to ask you. Have you found where during your research, let's say that they will rarely break cover, and even if they're in the heaviest of cover, they'll stay within the thickest areas, the densest part of the forest.
Well, that's true, and they're bolder in the summer because the cover is there. In the wintertime, they get pretty wary when the trees are essentially naked. So, for sure, I agree with that.
It's pretty interesting. I'm just, you have so many different. I've been researching for 12 years, and in the grand scheme of things, it's not a very long period of time. But you do compare the way they move, their habitat, and you compare it with other wildlife, for instance. And here's a question that I want to ask you. Now, here in Texas, we have probably one of the most, it is what I would consider one of the most invasive species of animal out there, which is the wild boar, wild pigs. And we've found, I don't know what are your thoughts that these creatures are, I believe, or I know they're omnivore from what I've found. But do you think that this would tie in with their population as far as having, you have a better food source? Here you have more meat in the wintertime because you have a higher population of wild boar, for instance.
Well, that's true with all animals. That's why they tell you not to feed, even the chipmunks in your national parks, because if you feed them, if they're fed, then they have larger litters and more and so forth. So that falls true with all animals. Just like the bears are bigger in parts of Alaska where they get more protein for salmon and this sort of thing. So if we're going to look at this as an animal, then it has to fall true with them as well.
Yeah.
Like I've told people, I said, I ever see one walk off a spaceship, I'm done. I'm not
That's it, period, in the story. I'm leaving. That's it.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I think I would throw in the towel at that point in time myself. And it has a tendency just to, and of course you hear stories like that, and that doesn't help matters. Well, has Laurie made it back yet? I guess the storms knocked her out. But no, I think what you're doing and continue to do, even with just wildlife in general, not the. Here's a good question: do you think that Bigfoot is an apex predator?
Oh, well, it would. Yeah, it would have to be. I've always thought that they found the same areas as mountain lions, and so my feeling is that they would travel not with them, but in conjunction. So if a mountain lion makes a kill, that they'd come and move it off of a kill. I totally believe that. So, and they're an opportunist. That's the thing. That's the secret to survival here. They'll eat anything and everything, from my reports of deer and down to ground squirrels. My friend in Washington, he has his cabin. He has to keep his troughs filled with horse food, because if they run out, then they'll come up and beat on the side of his cabin and scream in his windows until he fills them back up. So
interesting.
Yeah. So I think the key word is opportunist.
Yes, I agree. I've ran into that myself. I've told it before with my one of my son's best friends, he had a feeder. Of course, here we can keep feeders in Texas for deer and other wildlife, and he stopped putting feed in this feeder. Well, he went out, and the feeder was made out of a 55-gallon drum, a plastic 55-gallon drum, with tubing, heavy metal tubing for legs, holding it up in a tripod position. He went out and he found the legs totally twisted and bent around and holes punched in the feeder because he had stopped putting feed in.
Right.
And there was no way that a wild boar could do that the way it was. No, there's. So there are a lot of similarities.
Well, it was the same deal up in Washington. A guy got his recreational vehicle broken into, and at first they thought it could have been bears, but the canned goods, how the animal got into the canned goods was the cans were twisted apart instead of bitten into. They were just twisted.
Yeah,
so that kind of rules out bears.
Yeah, definitely does. And you'll find, I know I've talked to a lot of different people that's found animal kills that's been twisted. I know one of the Crystal had actually found a deer that the body was twisted, everything was gone, the soft tissues, and there was a blood trail, but the animal's hide was twisted so tight in the middle. And I'm sitting here trying to think, well, how could the skin? It was like a washcloth had been twisted so much, and I'm trying to go over in my head. Well, maybe it was two predators, coyotes had gotten the body and rolled over, But I don't know if coyotes do that or not.
Well, I'd heard that before, but this was with a Rottweiler and German Shepherds.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that happen to bloodhounds down in Alabama.
Right.
So I've heard that type of event in the past.
Yeah,
but go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
But I had a deal years ago. I did a television show here in Indianapolis and about this, and I never gave any specific locations. Well, I got a phone call that evening, and this gal said she was a Native American. And she said she knew exactly where I was talking about, and she proceeded to tell me that there was 5 of these things living in this forest. I said, "Oh, really?" I said, "How do you know that?" She says, "Well, I know." And she says, "I can call them out." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I can, if you would take me down there, I can call them into us." She said, "But you have to realize something." He said, "If you do this," he said, "you'll be risking your life."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, why is that? She said, if you get between a male and a female, or a male and a baby, the male will grab you by your ankles and beat you up against a tree.
Oh, my.
Well, that right away I'm thinking, that doesn't sound like a party to me.
Yeah.
So when she told me this, I remembered about an account in Washington where the sheriff had talked about hearing coyotes and something that sounded like a coyote come together, and he said just all hell broke loose. Well, that next morning when he investigated the area when it was light, he found 2 coyotes, and how they had been killed, they'd been beaten up against a tree.
Gosh.
So I find these parallels pretty fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
and I'm always looking for that.
You don't mind. I'd like to hear more about your friend in Oregon. You were saying earlier in the show that we would hear more about that, or was it Ohio?
Well,
I was having multiple events. I know that you probably can't say very much, but what can you tell us about what's going on?
My friend in Ohio, his started in the early 80s. And basically what had happened is they were building a home there, and they'd get so far on the framework, and something would come in and tear it out. So they were either deciding it was vandals, or it could have been a bear, but then that just didn't make any sense. So they ended up putting 24-hour security on it, and they basically got the house built. Well, when they finished the home, and they finally got moved in, one of the guys that worked with him asked if there was any way possible that, he had quite a bit of land where he could put a trailer on his property And he said, you won't even know I'm there if I could live in this trailer. And the guy said, well, I'll run it by my wife, whatever. So he ended up letting him do that. Well, I guess this fellow worked the second shift, and he come home one night, and he pulled in the driveway, and my friend was out in his garage welding. He saw him, and the guy said, hey, he says, I saw something run in front of my car. He says, it looked like it was on two legs, and it looked pretty good size. So my friend thought, oh, man, who have I got living in behind my home now? So he drives on back and goes in his trailer. My friend sits out there by the garage and turns off all the lights, and he can hear this something walking through the woods, and it's like completely going around his house and the hill behind his house and off into an area known as Jumbo Woods. Well, he didn't think any more about it until, I think it was like 2 nights later. His wife and him were in bed, and about 4 in the morning, something walked up to the windows and started screaming into the windows so loud that literally the window vibrated. So wow. They both hopped up out of bed. He had a pistol by the bed in the desk drawer. So he grabs the pistol and he runs outside and he hears this thing screaming and hollering. So he just aims a pistol in the dark in the direction where he hears the sounds, and he fires that pistol. It got quiet, but he could still hear it walking around in the woods. Well, he went inside the house, and his wife was pretty upset. And he told her, he said, I don't know, but I said, if I was guessing, I'd say that was a bobcat that was making all that racket. So fine. See, that consoled her pretty good. So the next morning, just about the same time, it happened again. This time she hopped up out of bed. She was throwing clothes in a suitcase, and she was going to move to the Holiday Inn. She was out of there. And so he, this really bugged him. He thought, what in the heck is going on around here? And he'd find weird things. He'd find, like, he'd have his apple tree full one day, and the next morning he'd look out, and there wouldn't be an apple laying on the ground. There wouldn't be an apple in the tree. They'd find fawns that had been literally ripped in half, and one morning the front part of the fawn would be laying in the backyard. The next morning the back part of the fawn. He finally got a pretty good look at it. He was sitting on his porch one night, and he had a security light, and this thing walked right up to the security light so he could see the outline of it. And he said it was huge. He said it was well over 7 feet, and he said it just stood there rocking on its heels, just staring at him. And then he figured it out. He said, well, these things won't walk into the light. So he said, I'll solve this whole problem. He said, so he lit his yard up like Shea Stadium. And that kept him out of his yard. In fact, when I went to visit him, he showed me some tree limbs in his yard that had been broken. And man, I said, that high up? He says, yeah. It's incredible. But he right away when it started happening, he's going to the newspapers, he's calling the game wardens, and he's creating quite a little deal over there. So his neighbors all hated him. And then plus the Department of Natural Resources were watching him, and he didn't have a very good time of it at all. And finally, one of his neighbors came over to him. He said, he says, all this fuss you're around here, he says, it's not doing anybody any good. And he asked the guy, he said, have you ever seen it? Yeah. He says, yes, I've seen it. He says, it's been around here all the years I've lived here. It's around here all the years my dad lived here. So he asked the guy, he says, how big do you think this thing is? He says, well, and this fellow worked in a meat packing plant, so he could look at a steer and he could look at it, he could tell him how much meat they had on the hoof there. He said, well, I'll tell you what, he said, the one I saw weighed about 1,500 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And my friend, he had a chance to see it 3 or 4 times, and now they've pretty much suburbanized the area, so he said not too much has been going on in the last 3 years. But his journal is just amazing to read, and it's incredible. And what's so wild about the whole thing is he had no reason to make all this up. I mean, the guy's a tool and die maker. He works in a machine shop, and he really kind of regrets the day these things ever showed up.
You know, it's remarkable how a lot of people feel that way. Like you said earlier, it ruins their outdoor experience. And people that love being out away from everybody else and then find out that they have moved right into a habitat that belonged to somebody or something else.
Well, I had a fellow that lives not too far from me that his dog was barking out the back patio, and he looked out there, and there was one standing by his apple tree, and he walked out on his porch, and the thing charged him. And he told me, he says, you know, he says, when I lived in Kentucky, I had to deal with this. He says, I thought I was getting away from it. Now I move up here, and now I've got it all going on again. He says, couldn't believe it.
That's it.
So you absolutely believe they are in every state of the United States?
Well, I can't say that for sure. Well, that's what, you know, all the data tells us. That's what, you know, John Green's, all the data he's accumulated over the years. Every state but Rhode Island and Hawaii. But believe me, when I started this 25 years ago, you know, I was always just with the idea of Northern California, Oregon, and Washington, and on up through British Columbia and Canada. But I've been enlightened over the years. In fact, when this piece of property we live on here in Putnam County, Indiana, was it 83, 84? They still do. They have sightings, but 3 people were squirrel hunting back in an area that's, it's about 4 minutes from my house. And what had happened is Dad was on one ridge, his son was on another, and then he had a friend of his son on another ridge, and they were back there before daylight. Well, his son sitting there in the dark, and he's hearing something move through the woods, and he's thinking, man, that's a big deer. He says, it wasn't deer hunting season. I want to take a look at it. So he kind of creeped up over the ridge, and he's looking down across this valley. He doesn't see anything at first, but the second time he takes a look over this valley, he sees this thing about 7.5, 8 feet tall standing next to a tree. He said it was black hair. He said it had a rounded head, huge shoulders, long arms. So he raised his rifle, and he got this thing in the sights, and he took a step toward it. He was going to shoot it. Well, as soon as he took a step toward it, this thing took a step toward him. Well, that just completely, he basically just dropped to his knees when he saw that. And then
absolutely, I can understand that.
In that moment of hesitation, this thing took off through the woods, and I asked him, I said, well, how fast did it run? He said, it ran easily as fast as a deer, but the only thing is it didn't run around the little trees, it just ran over them. And then the farther away it got, it was screaming the whole time. The more aggressive the screams became, and the louder they became. And, his dad heard all this commotion, and so he ran over to see what's going on. His son, he basically can't talk. And his dad didn't actually see it, he just heard it. Well, his son's friend did see it. He saw this all at the same time. Well, he decided he wasn't waiting for anybody. He just ran home 2 miles. So they got back to the house. They couldn't figure out what had happened to him. They thought whatever that was had gotten him. Well, called the local conservation officer, and they called the boy's house. Well, he was at home. So the conservation officer said, well, you keep him there. I'll be over in a little bit. So he had both boys draw what they had seen, and they drew the same thing. Well, the conservation officer told the young man and his dad, he said, I want you to take me back to where you saw this thing. Well, the young man looked at him and says, well, what are you taking with you? He says, what do you mean? He says, well, you're taking something bigger than what you got on your hip. And the conservation officer told me, he said, that kid would not go back there not unless I took a high-powered rifle. And
wow.
And the conservation officer found a footprint that was about 16 inches long.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, what a story.
I don't know if this question was asked because I'm kind of out of the, I hope I don't repeat myself, but have you ever been out in the field with Bigfoot field researchers, seen how it was, what the things that they do while they're out there? Have you ever been on a field outing?
No, I usually just go by myself or with a good friend.
I see.
I see. We did Monster Quest last summer, and I think they were a little mad at me because I kind of made fun of the Monster Quest. Because I told them, I said, these guys that go out in their ATVs and their Winnebagos and their cam trackers and their walkie-talkies and all this, that, and the other. I said, these things, they know the moment you walk in the woods that you're there.
Absolutely.
And I said, I could put these guys in an area where there are mountain lions, and they're not going to find a mountain lion, let alone something 10 times as intelligent as wary. So
do you feel like they weren't very receptive to your ideas? Yes.
Oh, no, they told me, well, we got to make television. I said, that we're just making television. I said, well, that's true. And, I had a chance to meet one of the big producers of Monster Quest when I was up in Minnesota. In fact, he told me they just signed a deal for 40 more episodes. And we were talking. I said, well, I do some work on the Sasquatch, and I filmed an episode with you guys. His exact words was, oh, Bigfoot, legend meets BS. And I won't put the words that he said, but, that's interesting.
That's not really what he wants to produce, though, is it?
I don't know. I don't know, but I found it.
Do you ever wonder about these shows? It seems like they never produced anything, and surely it can't be that impossible to produce something if you were going out there.
Well, it's just dumb. I mean, it's just, every time they go out, we heard something. We had rocks thrown at us. We heard a sound. We saw eyes. No way. I said, it's not that easy. I said, if it was, we'd have one in the St. Louis Zoo or a bottle of alcohol.
Yeah.
And especially with all that crap they take out there to do those episodes, it ain't going to happen. In fact, Monster Quest, we did some stuff here at my house. I've got a pretty good woods, and the gal producer asked me, she said, you think we'll see one? You think we'll see one? I said, oh, yeah, we got about 1 in a million chance. And I said, and let me tell you a little something, too. If I absolutely thought that we might, that I would have sat down with the Discovery Channel, we'd sign a little paper that if we get one on film and you're with me and I put this whole package together, Discovery Channel owes me $1 million. She just kind of shut up after that. Because it's silly. They're just making TV. That's all that is. That's not going to get anything done.
And that's a shame because they have the venue. They have the ability, and they have many times they've had some bona fide, really excellent researchers on their program.
Yeah.
And it has to be frustrating because I've often wondered, and I never knew the insides. Now we are July 26th, is it, Luke? We're supposed to have Doug Hychek, the producer of Monster Quest, on our show, and we haven't announced it yet, but we are supposed to have him on. And I have a million questions for the man. A million questions. One of mine is, do they allow these researchers to do what they do, or is it all orchestrated, or is it just for TV, or how does it really work?
Well, it all has a time frame because they're all on a budget. I mean, they can't go in for weeks and weeks and weeks and do.
Well, I understand that.
And so.
But it, I know field researchers out there that all they need is a weekend, and they can produce something. If it's not a vocal or some sort of interaction, rock throwing, something,
Right.
And if they could just get something like that on TV, I think it'd be just really cool. Oh my goodness, they actually got a wood knock, or they got a rocks thrown at them, or actually record something running away through the woods. Of course, there's no way to prove that it's a Sasquatch doing it, most of it, but...
Well, that's different. If one or two researchers are just going out by themselves, they're not going out with a production team.
Mm-hmm.
Sound man, and it's too many bodies.
Too many bodies.
It's just too much. Yeah, absolutely. Just too much going on for them to you know.
We're talking about a huge group of people going out there.
Oh, yeah.
Those 10 or 12 or how many?
Too many. Yeah, too many.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's you know, it's lucky. It's just pure lucky. You know, Roger Patterson and Bob Gimel were I don't know if Bob feels that way. I know his wife doesn't, but they were the luckiest guys in the world.
Yes.
To get that done, and as quickly as they did. Essentially, it wasn't quick. They'd spent a long time in Bluff Creek, but.
What do you think? Do you think there's other people out there with footage? I believe I heard you say that earlier. You believe there are people out there that have that kind of footage.
Right. I've talked to one on the phone the other night that said that he did.
Well, the reason why they're not coming forward is because they don't want the location revealed.
Absolutely. Yeah. They don't want to ruin their hideaway, their dream home, their place they go to escape. A fellow I know they'd found some footprints down in southern Indiana, and he went in with the sheriff, and he said they're pouring plaster cast in these footprints, and all of a sudden they see this guy walking through the woods, and he comes up and he goes, "What are you doing?" He says, "We're making these plaster casts of these footprints that we found back here." "Well, what are you going to do with them? You ain't going to take them to the TV or anything like that?" He says, "Well, no, just our own research." He says, "You need to leave them things alone." And then he just left.
I've heard that before.
Yeah.
I have had people tell me that. You just need to leave them alone.
Yep. Me too.
They don't need you. They don't need you. They don't want you. They're better off without you. Leave them alone. I continue to search for them because my main thing, and other people I know feel the same way, we're seeking to interact in a positive way. It's going to be invasive to a certain point because if you go to the edge of the woods and you're trying to talk to them, you're annoying them, most likely. You're annoying them. You're keeping them from doing what they need to do because they've got to watch you. They might need to hunt. They might need to do this or that. And we are coming up on the end of the show.
Already? Wow.
Larry, thank you so much for coming on our show. We really enjoyed it, and it was a really great show. We look forward to those DVDs coming out. They can be found on LarryTheAnimalGuy.com. LarryTheAnimalGuy.com. Is that the URL?
Right. Yeah. That's how you get to my website.
Okay. Larry, we want you to stay in touch because we're really curious to see how your life is going to change from this coming year. We appreciate you giving that presentation. You don't know how much all of us appreciate being the man. You are the man of 2009, and we thank you for it. And we thank you for coming on the show.
It was my pleasure to be on the show, and anyone that has a good story to tell me, I'm all ears.
Great.
Oh, well, we do. We know how to get a hold of you. So everyone that is interested in purchasing these DVDs can find the information out on your website probably in a couple of weeks. Is that correct?
Oh, they can find it out right now. And
great.
All I'm doing is waiting for the DVDs to show up of the lecture. And as soon as those show up, I'm sending out to all the people that have already purchased them, which is quite a few. In fact, I've got to ship a set to New Zealand, of all places. And there's been several, and I don't know how many I'll have. Like I've told people, I said there's going to be a very limited quantity. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so anybody that's, because I'm not going to get that many of them, so. Anyone that thinks they might be interested, please, because Yeah.
They're going to go fast. You know that, just like hotcakes.
Well,
I'm serious. They will, and that's a shame that
we'll
it's
see what
only
happens.
limited quality.
Oh, and by the way, I'm doing a presentation in Portland, Indiana.
Quantity. Are
Tuesday,
you?
Yeah, Tuesday night at the Jay County Library at 6:30. That's in northeastern part of Indiana. So if anybody's in that vicinity, I'll be there Tuesday night at 6:30 for about an hour and a half. So
great. Well, if you ever make it down towards
Texas, is it a Bigfoot presentation or an animal presentation?
Yeah, no, it's
my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Luke. I'm sorry to cut you off. I had to ask that.
Well, I was gonna invite him if you're ever interested in going out in the field on a trip into some of the research areas that we have. You are more than welcome to go.
Oh, okay.
It is an open invitation.
Great.
And I would love to.
In Texas, let us know because we know some wonderful areas. We are uninvasive type of research, very peaceful research. We have our different methods of trying to get them to interact with us, and I think it would be really interesting if you were to come with us sometime.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it would be great. So you have an open invitation.
All right.
Yes.
We appreciate you.
Yes, we do, Larry. We won't keep you any longer. We're going to go ahead and sign off. Tell everyone next week we've got Scott Harriet, that is going to be a very interesting show. And so everyone, thank you for listening in tonight, callers. Good night.
Good night, everybody.